So good afternoon, everyone. It is a real pleasure to welcome all of you. For those of you who do not know, I'm Deva Dutta. I'm the Chancellor of Rutgers University, New Brunswick. And this event is a partnership with the Senior Vice President's Office, Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs. And as all of you know from the program, we are celebrating Brent Rubens, who is the recipient of the Baldrige Foundation's National Award for Leadership Excellence. So Brent is a distinguished professor of communication here. He's a longtime Rutgers faculty, close to 50 years. My God, 47. Yep. 47, yeah. After I read up about you, I said, wow, that is impressive, Brent. But he's a fellow Midwesterner. He's from Iowa. He got his degrees from Iowa. And then he started here at Rutgers as an assistant professor of communication in then what used to be the Department of Journalism. I'm not going to go through every year, but I want you to know that he was instrumental in creating two organizations, both very important at Rutgers University. He first created, or helped create, the Department of Communication. It used to be Department of Journalism, and through a collaboration with several faculty, he created the Department of Communication. And later, he was asked by then Provost and the President to be a member of a task force to create a new school, the school that we know today as the School of Communication and Information, more fondly known as SCI. And Brent was the first doctoral program director, first PhD program director. That is important because what he did when he created the new school Department of Communication, he actually transformed a professionally oriented Department of Journalism, which used to have 4 faculty and about 50 majors, into a research-based, theoretically integrated with the practice of communication in that new department. So that is very important, and therefore it is no surprise that he was also selected to be the director of the doctoral program in the new school. So in this role, he helped create a theoretical and programmatic framework to incorporate views of various disciplines in a single hybrid PhD program, which would then become the first of its kind in the nation. So here is something I can say to you from my past life. When I used to be at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, I was part of a task force charged to look for ways to integrate the School of Journalism, or the School of Media as it's called there, I think now, and the School of Library and Information Science. So we looked at Rutgers. I think Rutgers was a university that was considered by the task force as at the leading edge. So we studied Rutgers very carefully, and that is the first time I got to hear the name Brent Rubens. Now, it so happens, as it happens in many things at Illinois, it never came to pass. The politics took over, the chancellors changed, the president changed, and all of that happened. So as of now, it still is separate. There is a School of Media, and there is a School of Information Science. But it just, we looked at Rutgers as one of the schools, and as a public research university, we thought this was a model we would like to follow. So the interdisciplinary and systemic approach that Brent has exhibited in administration is actually rooted in his own research. And many of us will actually recognize that, by many of us, I mean us administrators who have moved to the dark side, that our interest and the approach that we bring to administration stems from the research and the frameworks that we are most comfortable with. So Brent is exactly that person. In his research, he advanced interdisciplinary and systemic. I focus more on the systemic approaches to the study of communication. He helped create frameworks that integrate interpersonal, organizational, and mass communication levels of explanation to cross-cultural, health, educational, organizational, and leadership context. There's a wide body of work that is credited to Brent. I do not have the time to go into the details of his, nor is the purpose here today. He has received several awards and honors in his distinguished career. He was an early reader, I need to point this out, in the internationalization of communications research. He established the highly influential Communication Yearbook for International Communication Association. This yearbook, now in its 40th year of publication, that is amazing, has promoted theoretical integration and coherence across the sub-areas of this field. So it truly is an evidence of Brent's organizational leadership, his research prowess and contributions. So now I'm going to ask Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs, Barbara Lee, to come and speak on the contributions that he has made to Rutgers, for which I believe he is receiving the Baldrige Foundation Award. Barbara?
Thank you, Detta. It's my great pleasure to join all of you, our Rutgers community, and our distinguished guests and panelists in celebrating the great achievements of Dr. Brent Rubin, and to honor him today for being named the inaugural recipient of the Baldrige Foundation National Leadership Excellence Award in Education. But first, I want to comment on Brent's contributions to Rutgers over the years. I've known Brent for a long time, not for 50 years, but it's nice to have someone in the room who's been at Rutgers longer than I have. That's getting less and less likely. Long before the Baldrige Award, Brent Rubin focused on making a difference for students, for faculty, for staff, and for our university as a whole. He poured his own talent and leadership into Rutgers University, seeing problems, creating opportunities, and helping to make our university and its leaders better. He saw new department chairs and deans who needed advice and support as they entered a leadership role, often for the first time. And even if they had leadership experience, leading at Rutgers can be quite different than leading at other universities. Brent saw and understood that and worked to help make it better. He realized that PhD students, as future faculty, would benefit from learning about academic leadership and academic governance to enhance their careers, and to benefit the universities where they would obtain faculty jobs and eventually become leaders themselves. He saw that faculty and staff at Rutgers who were talented and who aspired to leadership roles would benefit from learning about how to lead in the unique environment of a university. And so he created several programs over the years that focus on leadership and improvement in the way we function as leaders and the way our university and its departments, centers, institutes, and programs function as organizations. I'll say more about those programs in a moment. So the Baldrige Award is named after former U.S. Secretary of Commerce Malcolm Baldrige. The Baldrige National Quality Award program was established by the U.S. Congress in 1987 to promote U.S. corporate effectiveness. The model provides an organizational assessment framework that combines scholarly concepts of organizational theory with successful organizational and leadership practices. Just right up Brent's alley. In 2016, the Foundation's Board of Directors authorized leadership awards in business, healthcare, education, cybersecurity, nonprofit, and government to recognize outstanding leaders in all sectors. Professor Rubin joins the first esteemed group of award-winning leaders as the recipient of the Baldrige Award in Education. Over his distinguished career, Brent has earned a national reputation in 4 distinct areas of communication: higher education organization development, service and quality assessment, communication and information systems, medical and health communication, and intercultural communication. A leader in his field, he's made important contributions in both research and theory, and has published several of the classic books of the discipline. Of particular importance, the book and program he created, Excellence in Higher Education Guide, a framework for the design, assessment, and continuous improvement of institutions, departments, and programs, and that all fits on the cover of the book, derives its inspiration from the Baldrige model and the set of principles employed by the U.S. Higher Education Accrediting Associations, and we've had some recent experience with one of those, and Brent was very, very important in the preparation for that visit. In 1993, Brent was appointed to establish a university-wide program in organizational quality and communication improvement, now called the Rutgers Center for Organizational Leadership. The center was chartered with the mission of providing professional consultation and programming for the university in the areas of organizational effectiveness, assessment, planning, and leadership development. Brent led in the formation of resource-sharing partnerships between Rutgers and Johnson & Johnson and Rutgers and AT&T. And under his leadership, a number of books and articles were developed that applied concepts of organizational quality and leadership from business and healthcare to the higher education context. During this period, Rutgers played a pivotal role in creating a national consortium to encourage networking and to facilitate best practice sharing across institutions. Brent was a founder and the first president of the organization, now named the Network for Change and Continuous Innovation, or NCCI, which currently has approximately 100 member institutions. Brent's involvement with the National Institute of Standards and Technology and the Baldrige Framework began nearly 25 years ago, when he was invited to serve on the National Pilot Advisory Team for the healthcare and education sector and serve as a Baldrige examiner. Drawing on his research as a Rutgers University Distinguished Professor and his extensive experience working with senior university leaders, Brent successfully combined the Baldrige Framework with accreditation standards to create an integrated excellence model that uses language and a cultural format that is familiar and accessible to institutions of higher education. Since then, he has dedicated a substantial portion of his career to furthering the development, application, and use of the Baldrige Framework and principles throughout higher education. He has assisted nearly 50 universities nationwide with applying the Baldrige approach to their assessment and improvement efforts, including the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the University of California, Berkeley, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Howard University, Yale University, Nazareth College, Texas A&M, and more than 50 separate schools and departments here at Rutgers. Today, under Dr. Rubin's direction, the Rutgers Center for Organizational Leadership offers a number of programs to advance leadership, communications, and organizational effectiveness, including the Rutgers Leadership Academy, the Rutgers Academic Leadership Program, the Pre-Doctoral Leadership Development Academy, and the Distinction in Leadership in Academic Healthcare Program. And those were the programs that I talked about at the beginning of my remarks. The Rutgers Leadership Academy is a 2-year program that focuses on the development of cross-cutting leadership concepts, competencies, and tools for mid-career faculty and staff who aspire to broaden their leadership roles within education. And I suspect some of its alumni are in this room today. In addition, Brent co-leads the Rutgers Academic Leadership Program with Dr. Barbara Bender, Associate Dean, the School of Graduate Studies. This program is designed for deans and chairs and has been offered for decades. And I remember that it's been around for a long time, Brent, because I remember going to it a long time ago. It is particularly important for new deans and chairs, as the program addresses issues in higher education governance, contemporary legal issues, higher education financial practices, leadership, and other issues identified by current academic leaders as important and timely, or I suppose what keeps them awake at night. The Pre-Doctoral Leadership Development Academy, another one of my favorite programs that you started, Brent, has been featured in the Chronicle of Higher Education. This award-winning program prepares doctoral students for departmental leadership and beyond, and focuses on higher education policy, leadership theory, legal issues, and action projects. Another signature program, Distinction in Leadership in Academic Healthcare, is offered to students at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. This program enables faculty to gain a greater understanding of fundamental perspectives and concepts of leadership and communication, along with a better understanding of the structure and landscape of academic medicine and academic medical center. Dr. Rubin and Dr. Karen Stubis, Executive Vice Chancellor for Administration at Rutgers New Brunswick, serve as our liaisons to the Big Ten Academic Alliance. Established in 1989, this intensive experience develops the leadership and managerial skills of faculty who have demonstrated exceptional ability and academic promise. The program is specifically oriented to address the challenges of academic administration at major research universities and to help faculty members prepare to meet those challenges. Professor Rubin's scholarly and professional contributions have been recognized by many awards, and I can't or will not name them all, but a few are an award from the National Communication Association, the National Association of College and University Business Officers, and the National Consortium for Change and Continuous Innovation in Higher Education. And he also received the Daniel Gorenstein Award, which recognizes excellence and exceptional distinction in research, teaching, and service to Rutgers University. And if there's ever anybody who personified that award, it's Brent Rubin. As Richard McCormick, President Emeritus of Rutgers University, sums up his appreciation of Brent's work, for a quarter century, Dr. Rubin has been doing the seemingly impossible on an extraordinary scale, successfully and persistently applying the Baldrige concepts and tools of organizational excellence to higher education in America and around the world. Brent is a genius at accomplishing these tasks. At Rutgers University, the outcomes for academic quality, productivity, and morale have been truly outstanding and deeply appreciated. In a moment, Brent will present his talk, whose title is The Baldrige in Higher Education, A Bumpy Journey to the Promised Land. I am delighted that Brent Rubin was selected as the recipient of the Baldrige Foundation's National Award for Leadership Excellence in Education. Please join me in congratulating and welcoming to the podium Dr. Brent Rubin.
Deb and Barbara, thank you so much. I really don't know quite how to follow that. I really appreciate those nice comments and the work that went into assembling them. And they reminded me that it probably took close to 50 years to get those things done as well, right? So it's wonderful to be here and to have a chance to talk a bit about the Baldrige Award and to sort of celebrate collectively what that represents, because I don't think this was anything that I did alone. It was really a collaborative effort by many people. I look around the room here and I see so many faces that have contributed to the work that led to the development of the kinds of accomplishments that are ultimately recognized by the Baldrige Award. And it's so nice to have the foundation sort of singling out these contributions, and to have someone from the Baldrige Foundation here that will share a few comments later to talk about that perspective. Again, I think especially grateful is that the weather is so nice. You know, I was thinking, boy, the golf course and the beach, will we get people coming? And I see you're here, and so that's great. When Dick McCormick and Barbara Lee first suggested the idea of a reception to celebrate the award, it occurred to me it might be a nice idea to combine some substance with some celebration. You know, a little bit of substance about what the award recognizes and why that's important. And during the past weeks, as I was working on the comments that I was going to share today, I confess I started to have some second thoughts and was wondering, maybe we just go right to the wine and refreshments, And see, I would get no resistance from you in that idea, I know. But as I began to do some writing and try to figure out what I wanted to say, then my problem shifted from worrying about having too little to say to having a concern about having too much to say. And I did receive cautious guidance from a lot of my colleagues, don't make it too long. And so I've been busy revising and editing and pruning. And actually, I think I'm going to consider doing a paper called The Curse of Continuous Improvement, because I have really done so many drafts of this that I don't, who knows? We'll see how it goes. At any rate, I want to try to stick pretty closely to my notes in the hope that, I don't keep you here well into the evening hours, Let me begin with just a little bit of personal history. And during my years of graduate study, I became convinced that I wanted to do work in higher education, based largely on the view that colleges and universities were special and unique institutions, that they were different in important ways from organizations in other sectors, and different from which I assumed in ways that there would be very little to learn from other organizations in other sectors. So in 1993, before my work in assessment and continuous improvement in higher ed began, my research was focused on, as Deb and Barbara pointed out, interpersonal and interprofessional and organizational communication, largely in healthcare at that point in time. And my studies were focusing on patient needs and goals and their experiences in healthcare personnel, with healthcare personnel in healthcare settings. And it became pretty obvious from the research that there was a significant mismatch between what patients thought they needed and wanted and what providers thought they needed and wanted and what they were providing. And that this gap seemed to have less to do with medical issues, which might have been what we would have thought before the research, and more to do with communication and organizational issues. Just people talking past one another, not understanding the priorities of the other. And my research indicated that patients were really often judging their healthcare experiences in the same way they would judge any other consumer experience they had. At Macy's, at an airline or whatever, they weren't really equipped to make medical judgments of the medical quality they were receiving. So they were judging in terms of the way they were treated as people, the kind of information they were receiving, were the systems effective and efficient in dealing with them, and so on. I think one of the important implications of this was, and I spent quite a bit of time talking to various medical groups and working on programs to try to address these issues, that if medical professionals were to receive the credit they deserved for clinical competence, they were going to have to worry a bit more than they did sometimes about communication competence and about the way healthcare services and systems were organized so that there was a better match between the needs and perspectives they had and the needs and perspectives that patients had. So as I reflected on these studies, the parallels with higher education just became very striking to me. And as a Rutgers faculty member, I'd heard many reports of the so-called RU screw. Anybody remember hearing about that? Okay, no more, right, it's all gone. And I knew that undergraduates felt oftentimes that the needs and experiences that they had were receiving insufficient attention from the administration, from the university. Students found themselves reporting being referred from one office to another, having to go on a bus ride here, a bus ride there, finding that when they got there, they didn't have the information they needed to go back. And these stories were legion, and fortunately, they're really not at all like they used to be, but they were pretty widespread then. And also, there were individuals and offices where courtesy and friendliness and helpfulness were hallmarks of the way people were treated, but that wasn't a consistent state of affairs. You could arrive as a student in an office where you were treated in a very kind way with a high service orientation. People cared about you as if you were their own family member or child, but you could also arrive in an office where none of those characteristics were present. And together, these gaps in interpersonal and organizational functioning, I think, were largely the basis for what was called the RU screw. Now, ironically, faculty often face the same problems, and I think I can see some nodding there, right? The university would go to great lengths to recruit talented faculty and staff, and many of whom, shortly after their arrival, like students, found themselves overwhelmed by confusing and unwelcoming systems, unwieldy work processes, and highly fragmented institutional structures. all quite familiar for those of us that have been here in the 40s number of years or so, right? So these problems were not unique to Rutgers, though. We often, I think, thought about the RU screw as something that was unique to us, but it wasn't. As you traveled around other schools, there were other names for these things, but any large university seemed to generate a lot of these problems. And I do think, though, that this is one of the areas where Rutgers may have been a world-class leader at the time. And I think given the challenges of our geography and the confusing structures that resulted from our unique history, we had the edge on a lot of other institutions. During the same period, my research in healthcare had come to the attention of Johnson & Johnson, and they had expressed an interest in working with me to develop formalized programs that would address communication, information, and organizational issues for hospitals and healthcare providers. Dennis Hamilton, who you'll hear from shortly, was the J&J point person named to work with me to explore possibilities for collaboration between J&J and the work I was doing. Now, as I began working with Dennis, I noticed immediately that he had a really distinctive work style. Yes, you'll meet Dennis shortly. The project would begin with extensive planning. We articulated objectives, we enumerated and listed the key tasks, we developed a timeline, we determined exactly what the deliverables should be. You're sounding familiar, right? We identified the resources that would be needed, we clarified roles and responsibilities, we gathered information on effective approaches by peers and others, and then we would actually start doing something, right? And I remember thinking that I'd never approached any project in such a systematic and methodical way. I'd never even imagined doing all that methodical planning before you actually started digging in. As the project progressed, I came to realize that this approach actually wasn't unique to Dennis. It was rather emblematic of the J&J approach to things. It was their style. And in addition to extraordinary rigor in planning and detailed approaches to clarifying work processes, I was struck by the remarkable level of courtesy, thoughtfulness, and professionalism in the way J&J employees in all positions interacted with one another, and the way that they also welcomed individuals such as myself from outside the company. Frankly, this is not what I expected to find. Not in the business world, not just across the street, not in New Jersey, which was a frequent target of blame when we had discussions underlying the causes of the RU screw and problems of campus incivility. You know, we conveniently would blame New Jersey, but just across the street, we didn't find quite those same things in play. And what I didn't yet understand was that the J&J approach and those behaviors were all manifestations of their commitment to the core philosophy of the Baldrige. I didn't know that then. The Baldrige, which they called SOQ, or Signature of Quality, and they had developed their own version of the Baldrige for use in their nearly 200 companies worldwide. They were using it as a management model, and companies all over the world were applying this model. Now, my work with Dennis and others at J&J had a very significant impact on me, personally and professionally. I might say it was a transformative effect, really. It taught me, among other things, that while our higher education mission is definitely unique, many of our ways of carrying out that mission were not so special. And that, contrary to my early assumptions, we had a great deal to learn from other organizations in other sectors and from leaders in the business community in particular. Fortunately, I hadn't really told a lot of people that I assumed that wasn't the case. I just kept that to myself and was able to sort of transform my thinking before making too big a fool of myself publicly. But this came as a big surprise to me. And I came to understand the role the Baldrige philosophy played at J&J and the great emphasis that was being placed as a result of that on clarity of organizational and project mission and vision, on strategic planning, on leadership practices and development, stakeholder engagement, collaboration, rigorous assessment, and continuous improvement. So I'd become convinced that the Baldrige philosophy and framework and approach had a great deal to offer Rutgers in higher education. And I applied and was accepted to participate in the week-long Baldrige training program that was offered by National Institutes of Standards and Technology. Now, let's see how we do here. We might need, okay, so there are only going to be 3 slides. For those of you who know me, you'll be very happy to hear that. 3 and only 3 PowerPoint slides. Okay, so this is the Baldrige model. Okay, this is the framework. And as you look at this, you see the terminology is really not all that familiar. The words that are used there are not particularly those that we use in higher education, right? Operations, results, customers, strategy, and so on. What I realized, of course, was that this model with 7 factors is seen as a generic model that's useful for thinking about any organization anywhere of any kind, regardless of the sector. But it became pretty obvious to me that this wasn't going to play all that well in higher education, that these words were not going to be so well received. But yet I could see the value of this model. And terminology aside, it was clear to me that the framework was broadly applicable to higher education. You could use it with an entire college or university, or you could use it with individual units or departments within. And it occurred to me that whether you think of processes such as developing a new academic program, or a new department, or ordering supplies, or streamlining grant submissions, or enhancing constituent relationships, and you could go on, listing the kinds of things which we do in various parts of the university, the Baldrige categories would all be very relevant to doing those things in an effective and efficient way. So I had a vision of the promised land, okay, and it was this, but really no sense of how bumpy the road might be to head in that direction. I assumed my knowledge and enthusiasm would be easily transferred to others, and this was certainly not the case. One of the great leadership lessons we probably all have learned that have engaged in leadership roles. You are excited about something, you spent a long time becoming enthusiastic and informed, and surely others will share your enthusiasm and embrace it immediately, right? Well, okay. So resistance at Rutgers and other institutions, particularly from faculty members, I know that's shocking, was significant. So it's easy to recall the voices of the critics. Baldrige is a business model, okay? Higher ed is not a business. Students are not customers. We don't have, nor do we want managers. Organizations in other sectors should be learning from us rather than we learning from them. And I could go on, I really could, for on and on, okay? And it turned out that the more prestigious the department or institution, the more resistance. And so it seemed on the road to the promised land, potholes were everywhere. And so in trying to make sense of this, I concluded that much of this had to do with issues related to language and organizational culture rather than core concepts, which I thought made a lot of sense and could easily be applied. So it became clear to me that the challenge was actually not one of adopting the Baldrige, but rather adapting the Baldrige to the culture and language of culture and vocabulary that would fit the higher education, and also that would fit the accreditation standards and approaches which we were used to. Okay, that's the second one, only one more to go. Okay, so this is what emerged. This is the version of Baldrige which we developed, and I think you'll see more welcoming, more higher education friendly terminology here, and it has a lot to do with, I think, the success we enjoyed with this. So customers became beneficiaries. Strategy was described as purposes and plans. Workforce became faculty and staff. Operations were translated in programs and services, and so it went. And with each edition of the framework, we found more and more problems that, from the higher education perspective, things which needed to be neutered or cleansed to have it be acceptable and not controversial to universities. And little by little, we were successful in translating the model so that it made sense to faculty as well as staff. At Rutgers, SEBS was the first unit that wanted to become involved with it, and the Rutgers Business School was also one of the very early ones to volunteer, to give it a try. And ironically, the dean of the Rutgers Business School then was George Benson, who, it turns out, is here with us today and is now the chairman of the board of the Baldrige Foundation. Isn't that interesting? Rutgers connections, okay? And it's great to have George here, and we'll hear from him a bit later here. So an influential early national adopter of EHE was UC Berkeley. And Chancellor Robert Berdahl, who I think some of you know, commissioned a task force of campus leaders there to identify ways that Berkeley could become a better institution. The group undertook a national study of potential approaches and concluded that EHE was the most promising organizational assessment and improvement framework that was available for higher education. So I was invited to visit Berkeley on various occasions and work closely with the leadership team there on implementing EHE. I recall that on various occasions, the chancellor was challenged by faculty and some staff as to why a program like EHE was needed at a great school like Berkeley. And Bob always responded, "Berkeley does have a great faculty, staff, and students. Imagine how much better we could be if we also had a great organization." I thought it was a very interesting comment, and it quieted people down. And then as he went over examples of the way that Berkeley didn't always work so well as an institution, people said, "Yeah, I see exactly what you're talking about." So the leadership team there working with them was really a wonderful and rewarding experience for me, and it helped refine and sort of take some of the course edges and course pieces off of EHE. The work there led to some improvements. I think I remember a couple specifics. Baldrige uses the word deployment quite liberally, and I think we can imagine that deployment was not a word that was fully embraced at Berkeley because, of course, it's what? It's a military term, and we don't want to do that. So, but implementation, by the way, was great. Deployment, not good. Implementation, great. So we were able to make that change. Training is for animals, I learned at Berkeley. Training is for animals, but education would be good for faculty and staff. So, you know, it was just kind of a process. And in the framework, which is now in the 8th edition, published in 2016, little by little, we kind of changed the language and changed the culture and shaped it to better fit the sensibilities in higher education. So at Rutgers, as was said, about 50 units have participated, and in nearly all those cases, the model was to go through a sort of a self-assessment workshop and then identify strengths, areas for improvement, and then do planning to identify the priorities to work on in the period ahead. Typically, the workshops are attended by all those in the unit, the administrators, the faculty, and staff. And we've had groups that were as small as 10 and some that were over 100. I think yours was more than 100 in the group we did. About 50 units around the country that I know of, and some internationally, that have used EHE. It's been used in administrative areas, in academic areas, in service, and student affairs, sometimes in all of those areas, and in a few institutions, the whole institution used the model, and a couple used it as a basis for accreditation, the accreditation framework. So the title of my comments today, I referred to as the Promised Land, and to me the phrase is a way of characterizing an institutional ideal for colleges and universities, one that includes excellence not only in the core mission of teaching and learning and research and scholarship and service and outreach, but also excellence in the way we are organized and the way we operate, the way we approach our work, the way we collaborate with one another, actually practicing the disciplines that we teach, and striving for excellence in all that we do, not just in our core mission areas. So I think this way of thinking also recognizes that students learn not only inside the classroom, the labs, and the studios, but also they learn from our faculty and staff and our systems through the daily interactions and conversations they have all over campus. And it seems to me that together we should be able to create organizations from which students graduate with a mastery not only of an academic area, but also with the firsthand knowledge of how great organizations should look and how they should operate, so that they can replicate that knowledge in the organizations which they come to work in. And I believe that Baldrige and EHE provide both a vision of what that promised land might look like and tools for that journey. And the last slide. So, you know, I think the framework called EHE does a lot of these things. It's the creation of this framework, it's really a story of collaboration and that involves so many people here in this room and many others and individuals at other schools as well. And it's so nice to have this event to really thank the people who helped to make this possible, faculty, staff, and students, help pave the roads and fill the potholes, a metaphor that I borrowed from Barbara, which I've liked ever since you first used it in an email a while back. And let's see here. Okay. So at this point, what I'd like to do is turn to my colleagues on the panel, each of whom has a unique perspective on the work that led to my selection for this award and each of whom contributed to the nomination process. And I really can't say enough about how grateful I am, not only for the role that these colleagues have played in the nomination process, but just in the relationships that they've helped create with me and with others as we worked on this. So I want to start first with Dick McCormick. I know most of you know Dick, President Emeritus and University Professor. He's been a distinguished leader at Rutgers and nationally, serving as President at Rutgers from 2002 to 2012, and before that, President, University of Washington from 1995 to 2002, and previously Vice Chancellor and Provost at UNC Chapel Hill. Many accomplishments that we could comment.
Try not to put the paper on the mic.
Oh, okay. So you're getting a lot of page turning in the microphone. Sorry. Anybody watches it, they'll be hearing page turning. But in addition to those notable accomplishments, I want to say Dick's been absolutely a wonderful colleague over many years, and it's really a pleasure to have you here to say a few things. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. I see that this familiar lectern hasn't gotten any shorter over the years. It's a great pleasure to take part in the celebration of Brent Rubin's Award from the Baldrige Foundation for Leadership Excellence in Higher Education, the first time the foundation has ever made that award. It's a proud day for Brent, and may I say it's a big day for Rutgers. So many of our departments and programs, at last count 50, at least that's what Barbara and Brent both have said, and our university as a whole have benefited from Brent's unique talent for applying the tools of organizational excellence to higher education. I'll come back to that, but first let me recite a few things about Brent himself. Most everyone in this room knows Brent, and I'm sure you think of him accurately as someone with superior talents for doing administrative type things, founding and leading the Rutgers Leadership Academy, spearheading leadership and development training programs, convening workshops on higher education leadership and administration, serving on accreditation panels, giving lectures at universities, businesses, and healthcare organizations, serving on committees, many of which he chaired. And yes, all of these things are true about Brent. But what you may not appreciate are the staggering academic achievements that lie behind these public duties and performances. Grant funding for decades, the publication of dozens of books, so many peer-reviewed articles that your head spins, many of them translated into languages around the world, and presentations at hundreds of academic conferences, not only in higher education, but also in Brent's original field of communications, including medical health communications. If anyone here needs a dose of humility, and most of us do, take a look at Brent Rubin's academic resume. It's staggering what he has accomplished. But we're focusing today on just one of Brent's accomplishments, successfully bringing Baldrige concepts to higher education. This achievement recalls an experience of my own more than 20 years ago. I was provost at Chapel Hill when one of our business school faculty members, a very smart and committed guy named Jack Evans, tried exceedingly hard to get me and the deans interested in what was then called Total Quality Management, TQM. We had meeting after meeting, but despite Jack's earnest efforts, we just didn't get it. TQM seemed like a private sector thing with little relevance to our glorious public research university. Now, we in North Carolina may have been particularly dense, but we were not alone among academic leaders in not getting it. But then practically no one in higher education, back then, practically no one in higher education did. And then Brent Rubin came along. And by now, as today's award attests, he's brought Baldrige concepts to colleges and universities across the country and to some extent around the world. How did he do it? Well, as Brent himself has already described today, for one thing, it was a matter of shrewd communication. Get rid of business sector words like customer and management, and of military words like deployment. Use the language of higher education. Use examples from higher education. Get faculty and administrators to see the relevance. Brent has already covered some of this in his own way. Brent's background in healthcare systems was very helpful. College professors may not be able to grasp things from the perspective of a private sector CEO, but they usually can understand things from the vantage point of a patient in a hospital. All of us have either been in a hospital or had a loved one who was there, or both. Brent saw the connection between universities and hospitals, and he used that comparison successfully to get the attention of higher ed faculty and administrators. Brent is also adept at seeing things from the vantage point of students. I recall a meeting that he organized very early in my time as president of Rutgers. We met in a large room, no longer exists exactly as it was then anyway, overlooking the still unreconstructed Rutgers Stadium. Students, and there were dozens of them there, shared their concerns with what was then called, and may still be called, still is called, Brent's already used the phrase, the RU screw. They had lots of concerns, from the buses to the dining halls to long lines at the financial aid office. And then I asked the members of my administration who were present to respond to the students' observations and complaints. We engaged them as partners, and together we came up with a long list of responses to every single problem they had raised. And over the year ahead, we systematically tracked our progress on those responses and reported regularly to the students. Now, I don't claim that our solutions permanently remedied all the problems. Obviously, they did not, and versions of the same issues are still with us. And today, just as then, they deserve the conscientious responses that under Brent's tutelage we managed to come up with on that day. He found metaphors that worked in higher education for faculty and administrators and students, and in a higher ed context, and without us really knowing what he was doing, used the Baldrige principles to help solve Rutgers problems. I don't have to tell you that Rutgers is a particularly challenging higher ed arena. Barbara and Brent have both made references to this. Our history helps explain why that is so, and I'd love to have the opportunity to tell that story, but that's for another day. Some people have even held up the RU screw as a point of pride. If our students can survive here, they can make it anywhere. But honestly, that's a nonsense point of pride. With Brent's help, 50 Rutgers departments and programs and myriad members of our university community, and probably most of the people in this room today, have benefited from tools and concepts that yes, originated in the private sector, but can actually help solve problems in the academy. Today, Brent is being recognized in the most fitting way possible with a Baldrige Award for bringing modern concepts of administration and responsiveness to higher education. 20 years ago, it might have not seemed like much of an accomplishment to celebrate, but it is, and right here, he's our guy, Brent Rubin.
Thanks very much, Dick. I'd now like to introduce Dennis Hamilton. I've invoked your name before. At this point, Dennis, who I mentioned earlier, is former corporate VP at J&J, and in that capacity had responsibility for the J&J Signature of Quality Baldrige program worldwide. Dennis and J&J's contributions to the development of our center have just been substantial over the years. And Dennis, how do I put this? Most recently, Dennis decided to cross the street, so to speak, from J&J to Rutgers and to enter the business PhD program at Rutgers. Obviously, all that I warned you about, the RU screw, none of that deterred you. And so you successfully earned your PhD, and you're now in the faculty of the Rutgers Business School. And it's really a pleasure to have Dennis here to speak to us. Dennis was the one that really oversaw the submission of the nomination to the Baldrige program, so he gets a special round of applause from all of us for making that happen, and special gratitude from me. Dennis?
Thanks, Brent. Thank you very much. First, obviously, let me add my congratulations to you for this remarkable and well-deserved recognition. I haven't written the nomination. I'm well aware of all the things you did. But I would also, like you have done, extend thanks to several of the people here who helped me with that and provided some incredible, compelling testimonials, which I think were instrumental in the success of that nomination. So it was a team effort and well-deserved. I've known Brent for over 30 years. I think that I didn't realize you'd been here 50 years, so I thought I'd known you most of the time. Not quite 50. Okay, sorry about that. I consider Brent more a friend than a colleague. I don't know if he shares that view, but I certainly see him that way. We have this routine of quarterly luncheons that have been a tradition for some time. And when I considered pursuing a career in academia, of course, he was the first person I went to talk to. And as he mentioned, that he tried to get my eyes wide open about what I was getting into. I don't think I got them opened wide enough, I think, in spite of your best efforts. But I was going to say, and to Chancellor Dutta, he was talking about how things don't always work out. I mean, it's no different in business, really. I mean, we worked on that project for nearly 6 months, the first project. I had just gotten out of graduate school. And they said, oh, we want you to develop this new service and stuff. And we have this professor from Rutgers who's very knowledgeable. We worked for 6 months. We filed all those great plans. And guess what? Because of the politics and so on, it never was implemented. It never was executed. I actually won an award for writing a plan that was never implemented. I thought that was kind of odd, It's like, oh, you did a great job on that, but no. So it's not all that different. But I remember years later, Brent approached me at the Quality Institute. He was considering taking on the senior quality role. And much as we give each other advice, he said, what do you think about this? And I said, well, come back in about 10 years after you've been doing it for a while. I don't think you can really make a conclusion about it. But we're happy to share what we're doing here at J&J. I mean, we had a great partnership with Rutgers. Many of our senior people at J&J were Rutgers grads. And so, any opportunity we had to collaborate with Rutgers was something we embraced. But it's interesting, as we talked again, and I would refer to Chancellor Dutta's comments, we had the same issue at J&J when we first embarked on the quality journey. We had a pharmaceutical company, a consumer company, medical device companies, and they said, well, that's not going to work for us. And one of the things we did in the beginning, and this was one of the things I shared with you, if you recall, I said, Brent, what we had to do is we actually had to customize our criteria so that our businesses were willing to sort of listen to it. And I remember you kind of going, but I never knew that might be influential to you in terms of the amazing work you've done with this. But we went along the same path of having to customize things, change the language, make it relevant, all to overcome the resistance and to get people on board. And it was a long journey. So congratulations to you to get to the 8th edition. I don't think we ever got to the 8th edition at J&J, but we got pretty far with it. So, while he's been generous with his praise of J&J's support, I would also say we clearly benefited from this relationship. There's no question. Your department's expertise helped us with a lot of things we were doing, the survey designs, the customer satisfaction concepts that we've talked about here, providing feedback on some of the other things we were thinking. But what we really became quite impressed with Brent was his unique insights on quality as it related to the important role of leadership and communications. I think you definitely had this perspective of how important those things were to getting people to embrace this concept. And we learned a lot from you in terms of those things. So if I can, as a final observation that I might share with you, for those of us who spent a good deal of our careers in the quality management space, I would suggest that much as I've learned about my colleagues here in research and academia, we're motivated to do this more as a passion than as a career. And I think that is important to understand, because clearly for you, this has been a passion. This hasn't been a job, this hasn't been a career, it's been a passion that people who are in this space, they do it because they want to make things better. I mean, that was the source of so many of our discussions and conversations, is there's got to be a better way to do these things, and we've got to find a way to motivate people to do that. And I always remember those talks where we discussed that. But with your prolific record of publications, conference presentations, workshops, commitment to quality, without a question, this has been a lifetime passion for you. I mean, that came out in every conversation I had with people in putting that nomination together, that you were passionate about this. It wasn't just that you were prolific about this, you were passionate about it. And for that, more than anything else, combined with your success, I think is a reason why you've been so successful. So again, I extend my congratulations to you on this remarkable and well-deserved recognition. It's been a pleasure and honor to work with you these years in helping you to achieve those things, but just terrific. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Dennis. Next speaker is Joe Barone, who are you promised a metaphor? Did you promise a metaphor?
Yes. I did.
Okay. So those of you who know Joe know that he's gifted at coming up with these little metaphors and images that sometimes at quiet moments in meetings that are really help get us through the meetings actually at times, right? I hope I'm not putting you in the spot here, but a little bit, okay. But Joe is dean of the Ernest Mario School of Pharmacy. He's been a longtime advocate for the value of the work done by our center and EHE and the strategic planning process. He was the first senior leader in the health sciences at Rutgers to recognize and embrace the value of our work, and has continued to be a really enthusiastic supporter, and really pleased to have you here to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Brent. I was questioning whether or not I would use this metaphor, but I will, since he set me up. But first, I want to thank the foundation for the recognition you are giving to Brent and the astounding work he has done in really transforming how we do assessment, how we do strategic planning. And the metaphor that I've heard that, faculty, getting faculty to do something is like herding cats. You've all heard that, but my cats have access to meds. So it's a little bit more complicated in, what, too soon? It's a little bit more complicated in pharmacy because we are one of the professional schools. Now we're part of RBHS, but we were the first professional health school to use these principles. And I had met Brent at several meetings. I had gone to some of the workshops when I was chair. And we were ready, and since everybody's telling a story, let's go back 7 years, and Dick, you're included in this story. We were about to launch a comprehensive self-study process. Our national accreditation agency had, prior to our starting, had changed the criteria for accreditation, which always increases the stakes. We were getting ready to launch a self-study, a strategic plan, in an environment where you had new standards. So the day before we were going to launch the self-study process, we had everything mapped out. We did our homework. I get a call from Dick McCormick. And President McCormick, the first thing my admin said, my associate said, that the president wants to talk to you. So the first thought I had was, my God, what did I do wrong? He called and he said, Joe, we want you to serve as acting dean because we're going to promote then Dean Chris Malloy to vice president to manage the integration with Legacy UMDNJ. So the first thing I did was think about how do I calm down? And you never say no to Dr. McCormick, just because he's a nice guy. And my colleague said, if you say no to acting dean, it's a career killer. So I thought it would be, and I trusted his judgment. I had never looked for a deanship. I had never wanted a deanship, just because of the whole cat scenario. But I said, let's do this. And the first thing I did, tell my faculty, students, and staff, is I'm not going to be able to chair our self-study because I am now the dean. So, but you helped us very carefully, you guided us through it, and again, that's one thing that the principals help. We're always in a chaotic situation. There are always threats, there are always changes. And I think trying to do something that is so high stakes in such a crazy environment and to get it done is a tribute to having a process in place that can weather these challenges. As a leader, you cannot let your team see you sweat. You have to get the job done. And to cut to the chase, not only did we get fully accredited for the full 6 years, we got 3 commendations from the accreditation agency. One of them was for the quality of our self-study and the quality of our strategic plan. So thank you for that. The next thing that happened was a few years later, things had been going well in my role as acting dean, and I actually thought of becoming the dean, and I think I have you to blame for that because it was so successful, things were working so well. I was asked to serve as the dean, which I still do, I hope, up until now and maybe even beyond. But the truth of the matter is we have used your ideas to conceptualize and to implement a strategic plan that works, doesn't just sit on the shelf. It builds on stuff that we've done. It evaluates where we're going. And then we make some changes and you're able to make mid-course corrections. And believe it or not, the faculty actually own it, the students like it, the staff feel empowered to do it, and it actually works. So in conclusion, I want to, again, congratulate you. I want to thank you for all the help you've done. Recently, Brent did a workshop at our leadership team at RBHS with myself and the other deans and the other directors, and it worked very well. He absolutely just nailed it. And I think we're going to be able to look at those principles in a predominantly healthcare school environment. So, but I do want to ask you a favor, and the favor is that next year we're going to need to start our self-study process for our next accreditation visit. So this is, I guess, where I ask you publicly, like, will you marry me, you know, in front of the Jumbotron? But would you be willing to advise us on our next self-study? Okay, great, very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think you got me back, didn't you? Thank you very much. And now Richard DeLisi, who's University Professor and Dean Emeritus of the Graduate School of Education. I think you became familiar with the center when we really did the EHE assessment with your entire group. And I think it was a huge success, largely due to your leadership. And since that time, Richard's become very involved with the various leadership programs of the center and is a senior fellow at the center, and we are kind of partnering on various programs, including something we're doing now for the chairs and other leaders at RBHS that we're working on now. So it's a pleasure to have you here to say a few words as well.
Thank you, Brent, and welcome everyone. I'm delighted to be here and to be part of this program. Congratulations to Brent, but I also want to congratulate Jan and the rest of members of Brent's family. It's often been said that behind every great man is a great woman, and I'm sure that's true in this case. Of course, Groucho Marx added, and behind that woman is a wife, but that's not true here. I also want to congratulate Brent's outstanding team of colleagues at the Rutgers Center for Organizational Leadership and to acknowledge them. Sherry Trump, Ralph Gelati, Barbara Corso, Kim Davis, and our graduate student, Christine Goldthwaite, really do outstanding work, and I'm sure Brent has wanted to acknowledge you, but the list is long. Also, some colleagues, fellows at the center, Barbara Bender, Susan Lawrence, Lori Lewis, Al Talia, and Martha Lansing. I've gotten to know most of these folks, and it really is a pleasure to work with such a talented group of people. When I was given the opportunity to support Brent's candidacy for this prestigious award, I wrote the following in part. The adoption of business-oriented approaches to organizational excellence and improvement is met with considerable resistance, even disdain, by the academic subculture within higher education. The creation of new knowledge, as reflected in books and journal article publications, is valued above all else in the academy. Dr. Rubin's development of EHE, his tireless efforts to have EHE implemented by diverse institutions, and his original research on the impact of EHE adoption are without question singular achievements for the sector, higher education. Even the most ardent skeptics have had to take notice, as some of my previous speakers have noted. Dr. Rubin's effectiveness in leading institutions of higher education to strive for organizational advancement represents a unique blend of scholarly excellence and roll-up-your-sleeves practical application. The importance of this work cannot be overstated as our dear sector, higher education, faces unprecedented challenges of unsustainable costs, global competition, the infusion of technology into teaching and learning, and so many of the things that are threatening our sector. And Brent provides a way to think about it and to deal with it. Now, I've been working with Brent for about 10 years, and based on this work together, I've learned so much from Brent and also a bit about Brent. Given his accomplishments as a scholar, it is remarkable how warm, welcoming, and truly collaborative Brent is as a colleague. I trust what has been true for me is also true for so many of you here this afternoon. Brent makes colleagues feel valued and feel respected, and in so doing, he inspires confidence and a sense of efficacy that is critical when the arena is organizational improvement. The road is indeed bumpy. It has been very special for me to work with Brent and the entire center team. I am proud of what we have already accomplished at Rutgers under your leadership, Brent, and look forward for what we are about to launch at RBHS, as you just mentioned. Brent, you've brought out the best of me as a colleague, and your friendship means a great deal to me, so thank you. The Excellence in Higher Education framework Brent has developed and the strategic planning model he and Sherry have perfected are truly powerful, as Joe just noted, and have great utility for academic leaders. I discovered this firsthand when they led the Graduate School of Education strategic planning effort several years ago when I was dean. Many of the things put in place are still in evidence at GSE, including the school's signature tagline, advancing excellence and equity in education. And if you don't think a tagline's important, you don't quite get it. It's really important, the message you sent. Now, it turns out that the underlying philosophy of EHE can be traced back, and Baldrige can be traced back to Aristotle. The philosophers in the room will be, of course, nodding their heads. Everything comes from Aristotle. Aristotle said the following: excellence is an art won by training and habituation. We do not act rightly because we have virtue or excellence, but rather we have those because we have acted rightly. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. That's Aristotle. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. Now, anyone in the room who has tried to change their daily habits, for example, striving to live a more healthy lifestyle, knows how difficult a new diet or exercise regimen can be to adopt. Knowing what to do is rarely sufficient to engender new patterns and behaviors. Habits are hard to change. What is true for individuals is surely true for organizations, and perhaps most true of higher education. Excellence is espoused as a core value in the academy, but is that espousal truly enough? Are the necessary habits in place? Do leaders have a guide and a roadmap for achieving excellence? Through his scholarship and research, Brent has developed key tools for higher education leaders to consider and adopt. These approaches have the benefit of being sensible, doable, and also based, as been noted many times before, on rigorous research and scholarship. Here comes another quote from someone you've heard of. As a leader, one wants to avoid Michelangelo's warning when he said, "The greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. Brent's chosen aim has been a very high bar indeed. His dedication and persistence have been remarkable. Brent has shown us that achieving excellence in higher education requires commitment to a process of continuous improvement. His model might be replaced by something more effective in the future, but that work remains undone. For now, EHE is the outstanding model for academic leaders to consider and adopt as they aspire for organizational advancement. Thank you, Brent, for encouraging us all to set a high bar and for also showing us how we might meet the bar in ways that preserve core values, including shared governance, transparency, and accountability to multiple stakeholders. Congratulations.
Thanks very much, Richard. So lastly, I'm really honored to be able to introduce George Benson, who's chairman of the board of the Baldrige Foundation, who's able to be with us here today, and can't express enough gratitude for you making the trip and for having Jane join us, your wife. Appreciate your being here as well. George is former president of Charleston College, former dean of the Terry School of Business at Georgia Tech, and also, as I mentioned, the former dean of the Rutgers Business School. It's nice to have you back.
I have to quickly correct one thing. It's the University of Georgia, not Georgia Tech. That would not play well. But I am, truly pleased to be back. I haven't been in this room for 20 years, and I can honestly say I've missed it. And the memories just keep bubbling up. I think you would call it today Legacy Rutgers. I think of Fran Lawrence, I think of Joe Seneca, I think of Norm Samuels, who I reported to. I think of my associate deans, one of whom is sitting in the room right here, Rosa Oppenheim. I think of my second brain. Where is my second brain? There is my second brain, Paula Henry. Paula was my executive assistant years ago. But those were good days. I also think about the merger, the Faculty of Management with the School of Business here in New Brunswick, and it was controversial then, and I understand it's controversial now. So not much has changed. I think about the Singapore MBA program that we launched back then, the MBA program in Beijing. I think about the 2 trips to China with a young assistant professor named Lele, who is now the dean of the business school all these years later. So it's really good to be back, and it's good to see all of you here in the room today. But today I am not representing Rutgers, I'm not representing the College of Charleston or University of Georgia or even Georgia Tech or the University of Minnesota or any other place I've been. I'm representing the Baldrige Foundation. I've been involved with the Baldrige Foundation actually since I was dean here. I got a call from Harry Hertz one day back in the mid-90s, and he asked me to be a national judge for the Baldrige Award. I was taken aback and thought about it for half a second and said yes, and did that for a 3-year term. And from there, they moved me on to the Secretary of Commerce appointed me to the Board of Overseers for the Baldrige program. Did that for 3 years, and 2 of those 3 years, they made me chairman of that board. I finished that, and they elected me to the board of the foundation, and I think that was in 2007. And for the last 5.5 years, I've been chairman of the board, and just totally have enjoyed that Baldrige journey that I've been on, while doing all the other things in regular, everyday life. I wanted to mention the Baldrige Enterprise for a moment. When we talk about the Baldrige Award, who's giving the Baldrige Award? Who's giving the award that we're giving out today, that we've given out last month to Brent? The Baldrige Enterprise consists of 3 entities. One entity is the Baldrige program itself, the Baldrige Performance Excellence Program. That is inside NIST, which is the National Institute of Standard and Technology, which is inside the Department of Commerce, which is, of course, inside the federal government. So that's where the Baldrige program resides. That's the public side. Then the private side is the foundation. So the foundation is a separate entity. It was established at the same time by Congress and encouraged to raise the money to support the Baldrige program, so back in 1987. So it's been around for a long time. The third entity is something called the Alliance. We have an alliance of 30 state and regional Baldrige programs around the country. In New Jersey, it used to be called Quality New Jersey, and I was on that board many years ago. Now it's the Mid-Atlantic Alliance, which is an alliance inside this larger alliance. It's a regional program that New Jersey is a part of. And these state regional programs have their own awards. And typically, if you're going to reach the level of the Baldrige Award, the national award, you've got to first win your local or your regional award to get into that competition, if you will. Now, all of that worked quite well until 2012. Then in 2012, suddenly, without warning, without reason, the funding was cut. The funding was cut for the Baldrige program inside NIST, inside the Department of Commerce. And then all of those people then turned this way to the foundation. Help, what are we going to do? We were in shock. The foundation, from its beginning, had been relatively casual. A lot of money was raised early on. A lot of money was raised a couple other times, but basically existed to manage that money and to dish it out when it was needed, kind of the icing on the cake. So you had the government funding the Baldrige Performance Excellence Program, the core funding, and then you had the foundation providing some of the icing on the cake. Well, all of a sudden, there was no core. It was just the foundation. And the way the foundation operated back in those days was you had a part-time director, and you had a board, people like me, and we met 3 times a year on the telephone for an hour. That was it, and we just made little decisions about give them 10,000 here or 100,000 there, whatever it might be. Now all of a sudden, we have to begin advocacy. So we transformed the foundation. We now have a CEO. We now have 4 or 5 staff. We now spend a lot of time in Congress, in the executive branch of the various agencies, talking to the various secretaries and so forth, making them aware of what the Baldrige program does and what it's done for the country. So we have this big advocacy mission. We've also got the fundraising mission, which now we've had to ramp that up considerably. And we also added a strategy aspect, if you will. We're thinking now hard about what's the future of Baldrige? Where should it go? What should it be doing? So that's what the foundation has been doing for the last 5.5 years since I've been chairing it. And so it's a voluntary position, but it's close to full-time work. But I've enjoyed every single minute of it. Again, it's passion. It's not simply wanting to do something for money. So that's a little bit about the background. And I guess I should mention this. This year, you've heard of the omnibus bill, the great omnibus bill. We're back in the budget. So all of those 5.5, 6 years of work, we spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. and on the telephone and emails and social media and everything we could think of. I won't call it a home run, I'll call it a double. We had a double, we're back in the budget, but we realize now that to stay in the budget, you've got to fight and be passionate about this consistently. And it used to be that we just expected the government to fund this program. It was done every year, no big deal. Now all of a sudden we realize that's not the way we should have been behaving. We should have been actively lobbying, actively promoting the Baldrige program throughout the country, and for that matter, throughout the world. There are 120 countries in this world that have a quality award modeled on the Baldrige criteria. So it's known around the world. I have an executive from Tata in India is on the Baldrige board, flies over. We now meet in person several times a year. He flies over for all those meetings, for example. And during that gap time between when the funding was cut in 12 and when we got some funding back again, the foundation put $22 million in to keep the thing going. And a lot of that money went to pay for between 17 and 20 federal employees. So you had a private agency, if you will, private corporation paying for 20 government employees. So it was an interesting period of time. Hopefully we've got things back on track. During this new era, we also created some new awards. One of the awards is the Harry Hertz Leadership Award, which is given now for 6 years. That's trying to identify role model leaders in this country. Another award is the David Spong Lifetime Achievement Award, which is just a Lifetime Achievement Award. Another award is the Kurt Ryman Scholarship Award, which is a scholarship going to a graduate student or someone who recently graduated who has an interest in Baldrige and would like to go through the Baldrige examiner training. So we have scholarships that we give out as well. And we have the award that Brent received about a month ago. It's the Baldrige Foundation Leadership Excellence Award. The award is designed to recognize those who help ensure the long-term viability of the Baldrige Performance Excellence Program and those that support and promote organizational performance excellence in the United States and throughout the world. And that is exactly what Brent has been doing. On all counts, Brent qualifies for this award. You know, I usually have my speeches in 3-ring binders. And I thought that this time maybe I'd just talk off the top of my head, but I thought last night on the plane, okay, maybe I should write some of this down. So I wrote down, I spent a couple hours this morning writing more down. Well, it's all pieces of paper now, and they're all falling down. So this is not my style. I run a lot, but I didn't bring a 3-ring binder with me. So Brent, as you heard, recognized the significance of the Baldrige criteria when it emerged 30 years ago for the first time. And back then, it was aimed only at business, as you've heard several times today. Brent saw the need for such a framework in education, and he adapted this business criteria for use in education. Oh, and by the way, we've talked a lot today about education, learning things from business through the Baldrige program and through the excellence work that Brent has done. There was an article, I believe it was in Forbes magazine, about 4, maybe 5 years ago. The title of the article was this: "What's the most difficult CEO job in the world? It's not what you think." That was the title. The answer? University president or university chancellor. That was it. There's a lot to learn on the university, so this is the academic coming out of me now. There's a lot to learn from universities in the way they're managed. In other words, business can learn from us. The issues and the problems that we deal with, we don't have a bottom line. We've got a whole series of constituents that we've got to work with. Each one of those groups wants something different. We don't have a stock price to make people happy when it goes up and sad when it goes down. But there are a lot of things that we do better, honestly, than they do in a business world, and so we can learn from each other. So maybe we need to start a new award. Maybe it's a Rutgers Award or something that we give out to businesses who are performing like universities. Dennis, what do you think? So the assessment books that Brent has done made it easier for educational institutions to evaluate themselves and to improve their performance excellence. His work helped to influence the creation of the education version of the Baldrige Award. He was involved with that. And the establishment of a Baldrige Award in the education sector, which is a very big deal. He was a part of the driving force that caused that to happen at a national level. Now, both the quality and the quantity of Brent's work, as you've heard about it, impressed the judges. They also noted the path-breaking nature of his work and the historical significance of his work. The work he was doing was right back at the point in time when this country, when the quality revolution was sweeping across our business world, and the Baldrige Award was launched to try to push that and promote that and make our businesses more efficient, more effective, more competitive in the marketplace. Right in the middle of all of that as it was firing up, he's thinking about education. Can't these ideas help in education? So they understood that. So Brent was an easy choice. Brent was an obvious choice. This wasn't hard. The application that you put in, Dennis, was very well done. So an easy choice to be the first ever Baldrige Foundation Leadership Excellence Award in the education sector. Very impressive. And it was my honor to recognize Brent on the Baldrige stage, on the national stage, I guess it was about a month ago in Baltimore, Maryland, at the Quest for Excellence conference. And that was quite a day. And I was so pleased that Brent got the Education Sector Award. And I'm also pleased and I'm also proud that you're here today. And I'm also pleased and also proud that Rutgers has put this ceremony on to thank Brent and to recognize Brent. And Brent, congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm going to work on that, getting that distinction right between Georgia and Georgia Tech. I'll have that right for the next time we see each other. So let me wrap this up a bit here. You know, I see the wine is back there, and we need to get to it and the refreshments. But I want to thank all of you for being here, for helping share in this really wonderful event. It's been a great thing for me to really have the opportunity to hear all these comments and to have you all here. I'd like to, in addition to the recognition that's already been given, I want to thank colleagues in the Department of Communication, the School of Communication and Information, particularly the university leaders, Deba, Barbara, Dick, my fellow panelists here, all who participated in the nomination process, and colleagues in the Center for Organizational Leadership. I think you're all back there, the best colleagues in the world, colleagues and fellows in the center. So much appreciate the opportunity to be a part of your team, really. And finally, I just want to mention a word of thanks to Angela Mullis and Jude McLean, who are folks that are behind the scenes. And until you've been in a role where you see what's involved to make something like this happen, you really perhaps, or at least I didn't, fully appreciate what's involved. So maybe join me in giving a round of applause for them. And finally, I want to offer a special note of appreciation to my wife, Jan, and my children and their spouses and three grandchildren who are here today, getting to miss out on school. Thanks to each of you, and especially to Jan, for unending patience and support over many years of working on these projects with a passion, and it's probably going to continue. It's bad news. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's time to party. One more round of applause for Brent, and then race you to the wine.